The autumn leaves rustled against the windows of Jefferson Academy as another ordinary Tuesday began. Students filtered through the corridors with their usual morning lethargy, backpacks slung over shoulders, conversations about weekend plans and upcoming tests filling the air. Nobody expected that this particular morning would become the day that changed everything, the day when one student's cruelty would meet its match in ways nobody could have predicted. Mrs. Elena Novak had been teaching at Jefferson Academy for only 3 months, but she had already earned a reputation. The woman in her late 30s carried herself differently than the other faculty members. There was something in the way she walked, purposeful and measured, as if every step had been calculated. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a precise bun, and she favored conservative clothing that covered her arms completely, even during the warmest September days. The students found her fascinating and intimidating in equal measure. She never raised her voice, yet her classroom was the quietest in the school. When she spoke, every word seemed deliberate, chosen carefully. Her eyes, a piercing gray blue, seemed to see through every excuse and half-truth. Some students whispered that she had been in the military. Others guessed she was from Eastern Europe, based on her slight accent, but nobody knew for certain. Mrs. Novak kept her past locked away, and the administration respected her privacy. What they didn't know was that Elena Novak had indeed served, but not in any ordinary capacity. She had been part of an elite special forces unit, trained in combat techniques that most people couldn't even imagine. The scars hidden beneath her long sleeves told stories of missions in hostile territories, of split-second decisions between life and death, of a world where weakness meant failure and failure meant never coming home. But that life was behind her now, or so she thought. She had come to Jefferson Academy seeking peace, hoping to channel her discipline and knowledge into something constructive, something that might help young minds grow and flourish. She wanted to forget the darkness she had lived through, to build something new from the ashes of her former existence. In her advanced chemistry class, however, there was a problem that no amount of training had prepared her for: dealing with entitled teenagers who believed the world owed them everything. Tyler Richardson was that problem personified. The 18-year-old senior stood 6 feet tall, with the kind of athletic build that came from expensive personal trainers and private gym memberships. His father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across 3 states, and Tyler had never experienced a moment of genuine hardship in his life. Money had always solved his problems, opened doors, made difficulties disappear. Tyler had perfected the art of intimidation through years of practice. He knew exactly how to push teachers to their breaking point, how to make classmates feel small and insignificant, how to use his family's wealth and influence as both shield and sword. His methods were calculated and cruel: public humiliation, casual cruelty disguised as jokes, and the constant reminder that his family's donations kept the school running. Most teachers had learned to avoid direct confrontation with Tyler. They would overlook his disruptions, ignore his disrespect, and find creative ways to work around his behavior rather than address it head-on. The few who had tried to discipline him had found themselves facing angry phone calls from his father, threats of reduced funding, and sometimes even administrative pressure to back down. Mrs. Novak, however, had not received that particular memo about avoiding confrontation. From her very first day, she had treated Tyler exactly the same as every other student, with professional courtesy, but absolutely no special consideration. When he tested boundaries, she held firm. When he made sarcastic comments, she ignored them completely. When he tried to charm his way out of assignments, she simply restated the requirements and moved on. This behavior confused and frustrated Tyler immensely. He was accustomed to getting reactions from people, to seeing fear or anger or frustration in their eyes when he pushed their buttons. Mrs. Novak gave him nothing. She was like a stone wall that absorbed his attacks without showing any damage whatsoever. The other students in the class began to notice the dynamic between them. During lab sessions, they would watch out of the corners of their eyes as Tyler attempted various strategies to get under Mrs. Novak's skin, only to be met with calm professionalism each time. Some students began to hope secretly that someone might finally put Tyler in his place, while others worried about what might happen if this Cold War between student and teacher escalated further. That escalation came on a grey November morning, during what should have been a routine laboratory exercise on chemical reactions and pH levels. The classroom smelled of various solutions and compounds, with the steady hum of Bunsen burners providing background noise to the students' conversations as they worked through their experiments. Mrs. Novak moved through the classroom with her characteristic grace, checking on each group's progress, offering guidance where needed, and ensuring that safety protocols were being followed. Her movements were economical and precise, never wasted motion, never unnecessary gestures. Tyler had been growing increasingly agitated over the past few weeks. His usual tactics weren't working, and he could sense that some of his classmates were beginning to lose respect for him. There were whispers in the hallways about how Mrs. Novak had tamed Tyler Richardson, jokes about how the mighty had fallen. His reputation as the untouchable Prince of Jefferson Academy was cracking, and he could feel his social standing slipping away. As Mrs. Novak approached his lab table to check his work, Tyler saw an opportunity to reassert his dominance in front of the entire class. He had been planning this moment for days, crafting the perfect combination of insult and intimidation that would force her to back down and restore his position as the alpha in this particular ecosystem. "You know, Mrs. Novak," Tyler began, his voice loud enough to carry across the entire laboratory, "I've been wondering about something." He leaned back in his chair with practiced casualness, making sure every eye in the room was on him. "My dad was talking to some people at the country club last weekend, and nobody seems to know anything about your background. It's almost like you appeared out of nowhere." Several students looked up from their experiments, sensing the tension in the air. Mrs. Novak continued checking the pH readings on his solution without acknowledging his comment. Tyler pressed on, emboldened by what he interpreted as weakness. "I mean, what kind of teacher doesn't have any references? What kind of person keeps their past such a big secret? Makes a guy wonder what you're trying to hide." This time, Mrs. Novak did look up, but her expression remained neutral. "Your solution is reaching the proper alkalinity level, Tyler. Make sure you record the exact moment when it changes color." Her complete dismissal of his provocation was like gasoline on a fire. Tyler felt his face flush with embarrassment and anger. Several students were now watching openly, and he could see the mixture of anticipation and fear in their expressions. This was his moment to prove that nobody, not even this mysterious teacher with her cold eyes and military posture, could make Tyler Richardson look small. "Don't change the subject," Tyler snapped, rising from his stool so that he towered over her. "I asked you a question. Where did you come from? What are you hiding? Because normal people don't act like robots all the time." The laboratory fell completely silent except for the quiet bubbling of chemical solutions and the hum of ventilation fans. Every student had stopped working and was now watching the confrontation unfold. Some had their phones ready, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Mrs. Novak set down the pH strips she had been examining and turned to face Tyler directly. When she spoke, her voice was calm and measured, each word precisely enunciated. "Tyler, you need to focus on your experiment. Your behavior is disrupting the entire class." But Tyler was past the point of rational thought. Months of frustration, embarrassment, and perceived challenges to his authority had built up like pressure in a sealed container. The fact that she continued to treat him like just another student, that she refused to acknowledge his special status, that she remained completely unmoved by his attempts at intimidation. It all combined into a rage that demanded immediate satisfaction. I don't care about the stupid experiment, Tyler snarled, his voice rising to near shouting levels. I care about who you think you are, coming into my school, disrespecting me, acting like you're better than everyone else when nobody even knows where you came from. Mrs. Novak's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes, a subtle hardening that only someone trained to read micro-expressions might have noticed. Lower your voice, Tyler. You're disturbing your classmates. That calm response, delivered in the same professional tone she might use to correct a minor calculation error, finally pushed Tyler beyond all rational limits. In that moment, all his privilege, all his entitlement, all his years of never facing real consequences for his actions, combined into one catastrophically poor decision. Tyler grabbed Mrs. Novak by the shoulders and shoved her backward against the laboratory counter, his hands gripping her upper arms tightly enough to leave marks. "Don't you dare tell me what to do," he shouted, his face inches from hers. "Do you know who I am? Do you know what my family can do to you?" The reaction was immediate and devastating. Several students gasped audibly. Chairs scraped against the floor as people stood up to get a better view, and someone dropped a beaker that shattered against the tile floor. A few students immediately began recording with their phones, while others backed away from the confrontation in shock and fear. For perhaps 2 seconds, the tableau held, Tyler gripping Mrs. Novak's arms, his face twisted with rage and triumph, convinced that he had finally broken through her professional facade and proven his dominance. He expected to see fear in her eyes, perhaps tears, certainly the kind of emotional breakdown that would validate his superiority and restore his reputation. Instead, what he saw was something that made his blood turn to ice water in his veins. Mrs. Novak's expression had indeed changed, but not in the way Tyler had anticipated. The mask of professional courtesy had dropped completely, replaced by something that belonged in a combat zone rather than a high school classroom. Her eyes, those piercing grey-blue eyes that had always seemed to see too much, now held a coldness that spoke of violence and death and the kind of experiences that most people couldn't survive. What happened next occurred so quickly that most of the students would later struggle to describe it accurately. Mrs. Novak's training, buried under months of civilian life, but never truly forgotten, surged to the surface like a tsunami of muscle memory and lethal skill. Her right hand shot up and clamped around Tyler's left wrist with a grip like a mechanical vice. Simultaneously, her left hand struck his right elbow with surgical precision, hyperextending the joint and sending waves of agony through his entire arm. Tyler's grip on her shoulders immediately released as his nervous system prioritized the overwhelming pain signals. Before Tyler could fully process what was happening to him, Mrs. Novak had pivoted on her left foot, using his own momentum and her grip on his wrist to spin him around so that his back was to her. His right arm was now twisted up behind his back in a position that made any movement incredibly painful, while her left hand had moved to control his left shoulder, effectively immobilizing his entire upper body. The whole sequence had taken perhaps 3 seconds from start to finish. Tyler, who had begun the encounter as the aggressor towering over his teacher, now found himself bent forward over the laboratory counter, completely helpless, his arm twisted in a position that threatened to dislocate his shoulder if he so much as breathed too deeply. The silence in the laboratory was absolute. 23 teenagers stood frozen in various positions around the room, their mouths open, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. The transformation they had just witnessed was so complete and so unexpected that their brains were struggling to process it. Mrs. Novak leaned down so that her mouth was close to Tyler's ear, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. But in the dead silence of the room, every word carried clearly to every corner. "You have no idea who you just put your hands on," she said, her tone conversational but carrying undertones of menace that made several students take involuntary steps backward. Where I come from, people who grab women without permission don't get to make that mistake twice. Tyler tried to struggle, tried to use his size and strength to break free, but every movement sent fresh waves of pain through his shoulder and elbow. The joint locks she was using were designed to control much larger opponents, and his thrashing only made his situation worse. "Please!" Tyler gasped, his voice breaking with pain and humiliation. "Please! I'm sorry!" "I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to what?" Mrs. Novak interrupted, applying just enough additional pressure to make her point without causing permanent damage. "You didn't mean to physically assault your teacher. You didn't mean to grab me and shove me against furniture. What exactly didn't you mean to do?" The questions hung in the air like accusations. Tyler was discovering that being held immobile and helpless in front of his classmates was infinitely worse than any detention or suspension could have been. His reputation, his image, his entire sense of self was crumbling in real time as his peers watched him reduced to begging. "I'm sorry," he repeated, and now there were tears in his voice, though whether from physical pain or emotional devastation was unclear. "I'm sorry. Please let me go. I won't do it again." Mrs. Novak maintained the hold for several more seconds, long enough for the lesson to sink in completely, long enough for Tyler to understand that his privileged position meant absolutely nothing in the face of real consequences. Then, with the same fluid motion that had initiated the restraint, she released him and stepped back. Tyler stumbled forward, catching himself against the counter, his right arm hanging limply at his side as he cradled it with his left hand. His face was pale and streaked with tears of pain and humiliation. When he turned to face the class, he couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Mrs. Novak straightened her blouse and smoothed back her hair, transforming back into the professional educator as completely as if she were changing costumes. When she addressed the class, her voice had returned to its usual calm, measured tone. "Class is dismissed," she announced. "Please clean up your stations and submit your lab reports by the end of the week. Tyler, you'll need to visit the nurse's office to have your arm looked at, and then report directly to Principal Morrison's office." The students began packing up their materials in stunned silence, stealing glances at both Tyler and Mrs. Novak as they processed what they had witnessed. Several were still recording with their phones, though they were trying to be discreet about it. The footage would be circulating through social media within the hour, ensuring that Tyler's humiliation would follow him far beyond the confines of the chemistry laboratory. As Tyler shuffled toward the door, still cradling his injured arm, Mrs. Novak called out to him one final time. "Tyler," she said, and he turned back reluctantly. "In the future, you might want to remember that everyone you meet has a story you know nothing about. Some of those stories include chapters you really wouldn't want to read." The warning was delivered in the same tone she might use to remind students about an upcoming quiz, but its implications were unmistakable. Tyler nodded mutely and fled the classroom, leaving behind not only his dignity, but also his reputation as someone who couldn't be challenged or controlled. Within hours, the story had spread throughout Jefferson Academy and beyond. The cell phone footage, though somewhat shaky and taken from various angles, clearly showed Tyler's assault on Mrs. Novak and her devastating response. Social media posts began appearing with captions like, "Bully gets owned by badass teacher," and "When keeping it real goes wrong." The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. Tyler faced suspension, potential criminal charges for assault, and the complete collapse of his social standing. His father's money and influence proved worthless against video evidence and a dozen eyewitness accounts. The school board, rather than pressuring Mrs. Novak to resign, instead commended her for her restraint and professionalism in a dangerous situation. But perhaps most importantly, something had shifted in the culture of Jefferson Academy itself. Students who had been terrorized by Tyler for years began to speak up about their experiences. Other bullies found their victims less compliant, their intimidation tactics less effective. The idea that actions had consequences, that power could be challenged, that justice sometimes came from unexpected sources, spread through the student body like ripples in a pond. Mrs. Elena Novak continued teaching chemistry with the same quiet professionalism she had always displayed. But now there was a different quality to the respect she commanded. Students were more attentive, more engaged, more eager to meet her expectations. They had seen what she was capable of when pushed to her limits, and they had no desire to test those boundaries. As for Tyler Richardson, he eventually returned to school after his suspension. But he was a changed person. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a cautious awareness that the world was not, in fact, designed to cater to his whims. He never spoke to Mrs. Novak again beyond what was absolutely necessary for academic purposes, and he never again raised his hand against another person. The story of what happened in the chemistry laboratory that November morning became legend at Jefferson Academy, passed down from class to class, growing in the telling, but never losing its essential truth. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who look the most ordinary, and sometimes the most important lessons are learned outside the curriculum. Mrs. Novak never spoke about her past, never confirmed or denied the speculation about her military service, never explained exactly where she had learned the skills that neutralized Tyler so efficiently. She simply continued teaching chemistry, helping young minds understand the complex reactions that govern the world around them, secure in the knowledge that sometimes the most powerful forces are the ones held carefully in check, ready to be unleashed only when absolutely necessary.